Okay, so after this chapter, it's not a long chapter, it's very short. Today we will be discussing the roles of transport in logistics, the different categories of transport in logistics, identify and discuss the characteristics of goods carried in the transport systems, how the transport function can be outsourced, different outsourcing of transportation, and carrier selection. Okay, so when we talk about transport, it refers to the physical movement of the raw or processed goods between the different stages of production to the point of sale to the consumer. Okay. Here, transport is a major component. Without transport, we cannot get our materials to produce our goods or service, and we cannot get our produced goods or service out to our customers. Okay, for example, a pair of shoes. Okay, behind that pair of shoe purchased online is a well thought out transportation network. Okay, if we're an online business. Okay, for example, Take-A-Lot. Without Take-A-Lot, they have a huge transportation system to ensure that they have consistent delivery throughout South Africa. Okay, whether that be vehicles, whether that be over the railway line or via they don't use sea transport, or via air freight. Okay, the largest port in the world is in Shanghai. Now, when we talk about a port, that is where shipping, containers, and sea transportation takes place. So we have our major, in South Africa, our major ports are Durban and Cape Town. Okay, and smaller ports, obviously, we have here in East London, and we have here in Port Elizabeth, but our major ports are Durban and Cape Town for international purposes. And that is where we receive and send out our distributed and bought goods from the international level of the world. Okay, so what is transport in logistics? Like we just said, it is getting the materials to produce our product. Then we are going to produce our product, and then we are going to use the transport that we have specifically selected for that specific good or service we've developed, and we're going to use a transport mode to get it out to our consumer, whether it be sending it to the retail store, or they've purchased it online and you're going to be sending it to a pickup point or their house. Okay. At the end of the day, transport adds value to logistics by creating place and time utility. Okay, so when we think about transport and us getting the product out to the consumer, it comes attached with the value of time and place. Without the transport, we cannot have the item delivered to a specific place, and it will not be delivered at the specific time. Okay, that is what transport does. It allows the consumers also, or the retailers, to prepare. We're going to be receiving this delivery at 2 o'clock, and it's going to be our shoe delivery. Okay, which we can then place out for our shoe display. Okay. Place and time utility are therefore the key elements when we talk about consumer satisfaction and transport in logistics. Why? Because consumers like to receive things as scheduled. Okay. If they are going to, for example, on Take-A-Lot, now they've paid for their order and it says scheduled delivery is going to be on the 30th of June 2023, and pickup can be at 10 a.m. Okay, if we can meet that or even arrive before that time and date, we will satisfy our consumers. And at the end of the day, we always want to have happy consumers. Okay. There are two key components in transport, and that is the product movement and the product storage. Okay. So when we are busy developing our products, we want to move it out. As soon as they are developed, we want to get it out either into the warehouse, going out for distribution, or getting it out to our consumers, or stored in inventory to ensure we have and keep up with the demand of that specific product. Okay, so when we think about transport, we think about place and utility to ensure we have customer satisfaction, and then we look at the two key components of product movement and product storage. That is the two elements of transport. Okay, now the classification of transport. There are several options, okay, to be able to get your goods from point A to point B, whether it be point A starting at the warehouse where you've produced the product, and point B being your consumer or retailer. Okay, so there are various forms of transport options we can choose from getting our products from point A to point B. It all depends on the characteristics of the product, okay, and the development and the mode you'll be able to use. Okay, for example, if you are based in Johannesburg, okay, you will not have the option to use an immediate transport of sea. Okay, you cannot use sea transport. Why? Because there's no ocean near the Johannesburg. Okay, so depending on where you are and what product you have produced will determine the type of transport you will then select for your product. Okay, and when we talk about the types of transportations, here we talk about air transport, pipeline, railway road, okay, road transport, and water, okay, which all have different products that and locations that we then use and select based on the product we have. Okay, for example, road transport. Okay, we can combine it. We can use different forms of transport. We don't just have to select one form of transport and stick to it. We need to ensure we can use the most cost-effective and the fastest route of transportation to get the product to our consumers. So if you're in Johannesburg and you've produced a product and you need to get it to Cape Town, okay, now that's a big different, there's a big transportation gap between Joburg and Cape Town. It's going to take days to get there if it goes via vehicle only. So perhaps to make it faster and more cost effective, we can use vehicle transport from Joburg to Durban. Okay, then from Durban we can get it shipped over via the sea transportation, which is more cost effective, from Durban to Cape Town. Okay, which usually is about a 3-day trip. If it needs to be done overnight, we can go directly from Joburg, air freight over to Cape Town, depending on what needs to be delivered. Okay, and if it is more cost effective. Okay, so let's look at air transport. What is that? Like I just said, it is using aeroplanes. Okay, air freight. All right, it is obviously the most expensive form of transport. Therefore, we only select air freight for specific products, and it is usually the high-end goods. Okay, and time sensitive. We use air freight transportation for time sensitive deliveries. For example, if you're going to be purchasing a dog, okay, and your dog is from another town, and you want to get it over to your town, you will have to use air freight to get your dog flown over same day. Okay, we can't have dogs sitting in cargo and in the back of a truck or on a ship, okay, for days. We have to have it done same day within at least 2 hours in South Africa. Okay, otherwise the dog is going to be traumatized. Okay, so when we look at air freight, certain goods that we would send over via air freight are perishable, such as flowers. If we get flowers imported, we want to get that into the selected and conditions immediately, so we want to send it via air freight. Otherwise, if you send it via truck, it is going to definitely perish, and your imported flowers are going to be dead when you receive them. And another one is emergency situations. For example, if you need to be airlifted because you have been in a major accident and you need to be sent over to Cape Town to a top hospital, you will then be airlifted over instead of sent via ambulance. Okay. Now, road transport. when we look at road transport, okay, road transport is taking up approximately 75% of transportation in South Africa at the moment, okay, going all the way from Cape Town to Joburg, to Limpopo, to Bethlehem. We have road transport, okay, and it is always utilized in most of our logistics and supply chain at some point, okay, especially if we're going to be using, for example, Take-A-Lot. If we have a end delivery to the consumer's house, it is going to be via vehicle road transport, okay. The railway. Now, railway is not as popular as it used to be. Why we say that is because our railroad transportation and infrastructure is not upkept here in South Africa, which has caused, obviously, delays, and we cannot obviously use our railway transport if the infrastructure is damaged. Okay. So if it was working 100%, it would be a very fast state-run transportation system, and it would be faster than road transport via a vehicle. However, obviously, in a third world country, we have disadvantages of our infrastructure not being kept up to standard. Okay. Although the initial cost of constructing the railway network is high, it will obviously reduce our mode of transport expenses for high volume goods. Okay, so if we had a railway system that was functioning and had infrastructure that wasn't broken, we could be using the railway and the trains instead of vehicles for our certain goods and products, which would improve our time and place utility that we spoke about earlier when it comes to transportation. Okay, another form is pipeline. Okay, so when we talk about a pipeline transport, this is not everywhere. Okay, it's obviously specific depending on the development of the economy and town. Now, when we talk about pipeline is mostly used specifically in the eastern in South Africa for fuel transport. Okay, so we will get our fuel via a shipment, okay, in a harbour. That's sea transport. Then, depending on which harbour it's gone to, for example, if it's gone from Durban via sea transport, it's then going to be offloaded in Durban. Okay, and it will either come down to, for example, East London or Port Elizabeth via vehicle. Okay, the BVOs, which are the petrol vehicles, and it can either come and deliver via vehicle, or the ship can come down to whichever town it needs to. And at that port, there is a port berth called the tanker berth. Now that ship will then offload fuel at the tanker berth, where the tanker berth actually has kilometers of pipeline underground or above ground. I know here in East London it is above ground, and then the fuel then gets offloaded from the ship and runs directly to the oil terminals, for example, Engine, Total, Astron, or BP. Okay, and depending on who is receiving the fuel, they will then manage the receiving of that fuel accordingly. Okay, so we would use pipeline for fuel, okay, deliveries. However, for example, milk, you can't do that for milk. Milk needs to be placed into boxes and to ensure it doesn't perish, and it needs to be stored at certain temperatures, so it needs to be transported by a vehicle. Okay, if it is going from a farm to the market or the consumer. Okay, so then again, sea transport. Okay, it is shipping. We are then going to either place our products onto cargoes, containers, which are then placed onto ships. Okay, And this will then go over to the UK or America, depending on where you are receiving and sending goods. Okay. So here it says globally, sea transport accounts for more than 90% of international trade. Without sea transport, international trade cannot be as successful as it is. Why? Because remember we said air freight or air transport is costly. So if we had to purely rely on air transport for our international trade, the price of our goods would skyrocket. That is why sea transport is the most used product. Okay. So what is characteristics of a good transport system? Okay. So it comes down to packaging and handling. Okay, depending on the characteristics of goods, certain handling precautions will need to be made. Likewise, certain packaging to use depends on what goods are being handled. Okay. So there are 5 basic categories into which cargo can be placed. Okay, so now we have our products developed, and now we want to send it over from Johannesburg to Durban. And the product we're going to be using is shoes. So our shoes are now individually boxed in their own box. Okay, 1 pair of shoes in 1 box, and now we're going to use a pallet, which perhaps can contain 50 pairs of boxes of shoes on 1 pallet, and we have wrapped that up with a specific plastic to ensure that the boxes do not fall off of the pallet, so it's secured. And we'll place that 1 pallet, perhaps we can fit about 10 of those pallets into the truck we want to send over to Durban. Okay, so there are different types of packaging and handling you can use to actually get it delivered to the next location. Okay, like we said, container cargo, if that's going to be going perhaps on a ship. Okay, liquid bulk, oil, wine. Okay, how are we going to be transporting that? Like we said, with the fuel, it will go in a tanker ship. Okay, or a BVO fuel vehicle. Okay. Roll on, roll off goods. These are goods that are generally associated with the transportation of road vehicles. Okay, so when we see vehicles, big trucks with about 10 or 8 vehicles on the back, those vehicles are essentially driven on, and then they are driven off, which goes to the term roll on, roll off. So depending on the goods and services you have will result in your specific type of packaging and transport you will select. Okay, so now when we talk about in-transit care, this means now that the vehicles have now left point A, which will be your warehouse, and now they are in transit on the way to point B. Okay, and many things can happen between point A and point B. That is why the company needs to ensure they have insurance in place, because we have high statistics of hijacking, which is always, for example, taking place in the remote areas. Okay, so you might be sending off about 500 pairs of shoes, but are 500 pairs of shoes actually going to make it to point B? Okay, so we need to ensure that the company has insurance in place. Okay, specifically if it's high risk or high-end expensive goods. Okay, as well as when they are in transit, we need to ensure that the goods that are actually being delivered are kept at the correct conditions. Okay, so if you're going to be sending, for example, milk, okay, or wine, you don't want to be having a vehicle that's going to be about 100 degrees inside. Okay, why? That is going to ruin the quality of the goods. So we need to ensure that the specific transportation we are going to be sending our goods on meets the requirements for that specific product. Okay, as well as we need to ensure that the goods the transport we've selected is not going to result in a fire, or not going to be rolling our products around inside. Okay. So it is up to you as the logistics manager to ensure you've selected the correct transportation that meets the specific requirements for the goods being sent. Okay. So when we talk about density of goods, it's also referred to as the weight to volume ratio. Okay. So this means, because allow transport vehicles to maximize their load. So we don't want to now select a transport vehicle that can take 10 pallets and you only load 2 pallets on to get delivered from point A to point B. You need to ensure that you use all that space, maximize that density in that vehicle for transportation. Okay. Why? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to do numerous deliveries if you don't utilize all the space within one truck, and that's going to cost the company more at the end of the day. Okay. As a result, transport and storage decisions are generally geared towards maximizing the weight of goods per shipment. You need to ensure you put as much goods into that shipment as you can. Okay, so sometimes the carrier may not be able to accommodate based on the specific size, of the product that you are needing to get from point A to point B. Okay, for example, perhaps you have a vehicle that needs to be transported in one truck, so therefore you can only send one vehicle in that specific truck. You can't load more than one vehicle unless you are transporting with a vehicle truck that can fit 8 vehicles. However, you cannot select a vehicle truck that can fit 8 vehicles if you are only going to be delivering one vehicle. Okay, so you need to ensure that you use the most cost-effective and secure way as possible. Okay, and this mainly falls into the machinery category as well. When we purchase large machines, at times the companies will then disassemble the machines to ensure they can fit as much of the parts into a shipment, and then can assemble the machinery when it gets to the point B. Okay, stowage and ease of handling. So an important consideration in transport and storage is to ensure that stowage, as well as the ease of handle is in place. Okay, so when we talk about storage, it's stowed and transport benefit from lower shipping rates. Okay, the form and shape of the goods as well as the nature of the packaging influence their storageability and handling ease. Okay, so we need to ensure that we have items specifically, for example, the shoes are boxed individually and then put into a secondary packaging and being essentially put onto a tertiary packaging of the pallet with 50 pairs of shoes boxed on. Okay, bulk items do not require wrapping and packaging as they are typically resistant to damage. However, when we talk about, for example, the watering or shoes, we need to ensure that we have our boxes, because obviously shoe boxes are smaller, so we need to ensure we can fit as much onto one pallet and secure those individual boxes onto that one pallet as secure as possible to ensure that there is safe handling and ease of moving those boxes during the transportation process. Okay. Now, when you're selecting the transport, the form of delivery, there are a few questions you need to take into consideration. Okay, like we said, you always need to look at what type and cost of material or product you're going to be sending. Okay, what is the value of the material? High end, or is it just a low end, for example, bread or milk or cereal? Okay, shoes. What will the transport times be for the transport of goods? How reliable is the mode of transport? Okay, so you as a logistics manager need to ensure you ask yourself and your department these specific questions when selecting the vehicle transportation. Okay, and then we can also look at what is the cost of the carrier. Okay, what is the reputation? Are we selecting a transportation? Because now remember, there's not just one transportation company in South Africa. There are multiple, so you need to ensure you select one that actually has a good reputation and is going to meet your expectations as they've stated. Okay, And then you can also select outsourcing. You as the logistics manager, instead of managing the shipment from and selection of the courier from point A to point B, you can outsource that that workload, okay? And that also protects the company in reducing your types of expenses that you need to take on as a company as a whole, where instead you can just pay one payment to an outsourced company and they can handle the shipping function for you as the company. Now remember, if you're going to be outsourcing, that is obviously expensive, okay? However, it takes away the responsibility and additional admin that you as the company and the logistics manager need to now handle, okay? And that is the end. Thanks.